I want to say thank you to everyone being in this room, because if you are here to learn about legal tech, then somewhere in your lives, like you're either touching the law, you know someone that's in the law, or you're like, wow, I've got to figure out what this whole legal tech thing is about. So thank you for being here. My name is Lydia Flocchini, and I've been a legal technologist for 30 years. So I am a lawyer by profession. I call myself a Swiss Army knife because I have led go-to-market roles in legal technology for the last 30 years. Whether it was a big information company like Thomson Reuters or small legal tech startups like Lex Machina, which is actually founded by Codex, the Center for Law and Informatics out of Stanford, Logical, a modern e-discovery company, or the company I'm at now, which is SharePoint Technologies. So I really love what I do. I'm customer obsessed, so I've been working with thousands of legal professionals, hundreds of legal organizations, law firms, corporations, nonprofits, and government agencies to really innovate the way that legal professionals work, transform how they think about the business and practice of law. And so it is a very interesting thing when I think about what I do, because the law touches everything that we do in our lives.
Honestly, not much, but my first job in the US was with LexisNexis.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great.
Yeah, so I briefly worked with them, and the company which I am in right now is the education platform wherein we provide study materials. And that also has, like, I'm not sure if I can share all the details, but that has some legal implications where we just modify some of the content on the page and things like that. So yeah, people work that know how it is important for the tech industry to have those legal things covered.
Exactly, and the education of lawyers, because lawyers have to maintain a certain number of credits every year to make sure that they're up to date with the practice of law. So I should have said I worked for LexisNexis too. Actually, my little startup, Lex Machina, which I helped scale and build, got acquired by LexisNexis. So I got to work for LexisNexis for about a year. So I've run the whole gamut of the legal tech space. Has anybody here, so thank you for sharing that, used a legal tech product, actually a user of legal technology? Okay, and I'm just curious, like we've started as an intimate group, people are coming in, why are you in? I have my friends, so I know my friends are here to support me, which is great, but anyone just willing to share like why you're interested in this session? Like what are you hoping to learn?
So I work at the Bear Institute of Justice. We're a nonprofit and we do a lot of policy reform, and in our technology department we work very closely with our legal team for contracts, but also just because our work is policy reform, so it's very policy heavy. Oh, thank you. We have a lot of lawyers that we work with, and so we're kind of learning how to advance technology while also work with our legal team.
I absolutely love that, because actually one of the things I'll talk about is how legal tech is transforming greater access to justice and letting and enabling people have their day in court, which actually prior to the pandemic was much more difficult when we think about access. So if anybody in this room has signed an employment contract, maybe in the last year or 2 years, maybe you entered into a technology agreement, maybe you purchased or acquired new technology at your company, or perhaps you have acquired new technology and signed an implementation agreement about what your requirements are. Most likely, you have already interacted with legal tech. Maybe some of these brands look familiar to you. Some of them are, we're so lucky that, I mean, we are in the Bay Area and in Silicon Valley, because almost all of these companies are really based out of the Silicon Valley. So we are a hub for legal tech innovation, and so you've probably interacted. So what am I going to talk about today? There's a few things. First, I'd love to share some learnings and insights from my own experience in being in the legal tech space. Share with you how technology is really transforming the way that legal professionals work, and so I really appreciate your example. That's fantastic. I'll talk a little bit about that. I'd love to share some examples of the innovation that's actually happening, kind of make it real for you in terms of legal tech, and then lastly, share some of my predictions and vision for the future. So I'm not endorsing any of these products, that's all I want to say. It's more just sort of a survey of what's happening in this space, especially in the light of the last 2 years. So what is legal technology? Legal technology is a combination of software, it's a combination of analytics and data that really is used in either law firms, corporations, or other legal organizations to really enable automation, prediction, and new ways for for professionals to work. And mind you, when I'm talking about this, you don't have to be a lawyer to use legal technology. You could actually be someone in the billing department. You could be a paralegal. You could be anyone that is touching any of these organizations. How does it make you work better, faster, enable greater service? Let me just make sure I went back here. Okay, probably clicked ahead a little too fast. Okay. So when we look at the legal technology landscape, this is actually an ecosystem map from 2020. At that time, there were about 700 legal technology companies. This is just in the US. I'm not even talking about the rest of the world. You can see some of the areas where legal technology is involved in, whether it's contracts, e-discovery, time and billing, security and compliance, document management, case management, business intelligence, legal research. So really going and spanning across all these different areas, just to give you a sense of the scope of what this technology revolves around. But there's so many benefits when it comes to how the technology is used. So I'm just going to give you a very quick example. Imagine that it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon and your client is a very big technology company that runs across the globe. And they call you Holly and they say, Holly, we've just been sued. That evening, you have plans to go to dinner. Maybe you're going to visit with an old friend and you go, crap, now I've got to work on something. They need you to research the law. They need a memo in the morning. They need answers so they know how they're going to proceed. That's a pretty big burden to carry. That night, you've made your plans. So what do? You're either going to go into your legal research system to start to look for cases. You want to know what judges you've probably in front of. What's the likelihood that they're going to accept your case? If you're a lawyer in a law firm, you're going to start billing your time because you're going to have to basically send an invoice probably at the end of your work. And so there's all these hosts of things to do. But what technology enables you to do is take that research in a fraction of the time so you can be efficient. You can get home or go to dinner with your friend. And also, not only that, get back to your client faster. Be able to deliver more value than if it had taken you all night. I personally have lived those stories many, many years ago. It's why I went into legal tech, because I discovered how amazing it was to be able to do this work so much faster through the power of technology. So I've been an evangelist of legal technology for my whole career. More importantly, I think it goes to, and this has become very important, especially in these last 2.5 years, is well-being and purpose. And we heard Gretchen talk about that today. It isn't just about the cases that you might be representing for your client, at a technology company, but public policy, the government, courts, being able to provide that access. And so these are just some of the benefits that I wanted to highlight. Now, I know that I'm making legal tech sound really shiny and neat and cool, but it's been very hard traditionally to get legal organizations to adopt it. And this was prior to the pandemic, which is one reason I would go out, I'd speak about it, really focus on customer success. But the pandemic completely created a paradigm shift because everything that you think about in terms of the legal industry really changed. I have clients that will tell me, Lydia, when we planned our technology roadmap, we looked at an 11-year forecast. That changed to 11 days, literally 11 days. Firms that will tell me, Lydia, we thought about, we planned out kind of 18-month procurement processes. We had to accelerate that into 3 days to keep our law firms running. And so when we think of all these shifts, some of these may sound very familiar to you, but in the legal tech space or in the legal industry, maybe like other industries, there has been shifts when we think of how do people work. Law firms, legal organizations mainly have always been on site in their physical space. So imagine taking a global law firm and all of a sudden you're moving into a virtual world. Or taking courts where people are going every day, and working, judges and people, research assistants and, the paralegals and the attorneys to now having to do that virtually. So what we've seen in these shifts are, working remotely, moving a big focus on going from manual tasks to automation, lots of process mapping and thinking what steps can we cut out in the process and be able to move this virtually. One of the biggest, and I know for all of us here as technologists and working in the technology space, is going from on-prem to cloud. That has been a huge shift. And while we are, in 2022, you would think that everyone would be in the cloud. But prior to the pandemic, many legal organizations were still on-prem. Things that we've seen, moving from paper to digital workflows. As an example, we worked very closely with our customers because we have a financial and practice management system who literally were trying to figure out how are we going to pay our vendors, how are we going to pay people at our firm, because they needed to automate those processes, still even printing paper checks. So the world has dramatically changed, and these are some of the shifts that we are seeing. But one that I am very passionate about is just what it's been able to do when we think of opening up our court system, our justice system to those. And so I'll share that in just a minute. The other is being able to really focus on putting the client, the customer at the center. And this is where we've really seen openness and transparency in terms of, demands for financial transparency. How much are people billing? Think about that when you're at home. How are you being billed for those services? Corporations that are asking for, we want to see the value that's being delivered. And so these are just some of the ways that we're seeing the focus on a more client-centric environment, which is actually, a big shift and one that has been vital to the legal industry. Two other things that I'm just going to touch on is the other shift is the focus on mental health and wellness. What we're seeing is that the use of technology in legal organizations is helping with burnout, helping people be able to have that sense of purpose, and technologies emerging that are enable people to do some of the projects that they're passionate about. But this is the one kind of going back to our extraordinary woman in tech sitting over there, is greater access to justice. So when the pandemic happened, the courts were able to keep proceeding because of technologies like Zoom. And while we may all be burnt out by Zoom, I think this quote really illustrates what it has enabled. More participation in virtual jury trials, cases that have been able to continue. And there's been opinions, letters written by judges of people who were able to still go to court, have their day in court that otherwise they wouldn't have been able to because they didn't have transportation or the income to get there. And so when we think about this and that impact, it really speaks to the changes that are happening. I'm not going to go through this whole timeline, but there are two stats that really, when you look at the explosion of legal tech, in the last 2 years, there's been an increase of 484% of patents in this space. Exponential. By 2024, 50% of all legal workflows in law firms related to contracts will be automated. And you can see just some of the other stats here. By 2025, Gartner predicts legal departments will triple their spending. So the space is exploding. So if there's anyone here, where your company is looking at, expanding into other areas, trying to really kind of get a handle on, what this new emerging kind of space to expand and invest in, it's happening here. Last year alone, there were 161 deals involved with legal technology. Last year alone, 161. This year, we don't have the stats, but I will tell you personally that my company was involved in 2 acquisitions. We actually acquired a CRM tool as well as another financial and practice management system. So there is a lot of opportunity, and it's happening in different areas. So what I'm going to do now is kind of give you sort of a survey of the different platforms and softwares that are out there and just some of the exciting things happening in this space. So Lex Machina is a legal analytics tool. This is fascinating. where all of the data around the judges, the lawyers, and the parties to litigation has been collected, not only for federal cases, but state appellate cases. And any user of Lex Machina can go in here and actually find out the likelihood of success that they will have if they're in front of a specific judge. They can look at the likelihood that their motions or their pleadings will be accepted. You can see just some of the analytics. And so this is creating openness and transparency in the law. So before you even start writing, before you even say, hey, I'm going to go into that court, to be able to have this data around you to make a data-driven decision about how you're going to proceed is very powerful information. Very powerful. And this, technology just continues to expand the type of data that's available. This is Westlaw Precision. This actually was just launched a couple weeks, 2 weeks ago. And this platform technically has taken all of the cases in the United States, has had tagging and coding through editors that have been looking at the data. And what they've been able to do is if you run a search on a specific issue or topic, you can actually reduce what would have been traditional research time of almost 5 hours down to almost 1 hour and 1 hour and 45 minutes. So extraordinary time that's cut. So what does that mean? You can spend more time consulting with your client, thinking of the strategy, and shift all the time that you have been researching, highlighting cases, trying to figure out what the strategy should be to talking to your client about it. This is something I think is really interesting. The Virtual Law Clinic is actually a platform that has been designed for attorneys who want to do pro bono work. They want to be able to represent people, but may not have, and this is on their own, right? At no charge, people that may not have otherwise the financial means to have an attorney, but so they do this pro bono. And this platform enables them to be able to manage those cases, track their time, and do their work. And so, I love that this is that type of technology. It becomes purpose-filled, that becomes available to helping those that might be disadvantaged. This is another one that I was going to share that I just think is really interesting, fascinating, actually, is called Justice Text. So oftentimes in criminal cases, you have to review all of this video surveillance. It can take very long amount, inordinate amount of time. Imagine the next morning you've got to be in court, you've got to go in and really think about how you're going to respond to the claims. This reduces any of that surveillance review time anywhere from 30 to 50%. And you keep hearing about law firms that are using it to be able to think about, how do they craft better arguments? How do they go through all that surveillance text, which otherwise would have taken hours and hours to do? I was talking to my friend actually about this today, because when you're writing a brief for court, you have to think about, how is the judge going to rule on these issues? Are there new cases that have come out? The law can change, just so everyone knows in this room, within 1 to 4 hours. A case can be overturned or changed. What this does is it takes AI, literally looks at all of the citations in that pleading and will tell you the likelihood that the judge or the court will rule on that. And there was actually a testimonial customer just came out that said they saved 7 non-billable hours a week for a total savings of almost $91,000 to their client. That's significant by using this technology. These are advancements that we've never seen before. It's phenomenal when you think about this. This is actually a company out of the Bay Area, Everlaw, that is now able to go across 25 million documents in discovery, in litigation, and use these clustering tools to be able to look at issues that they should be spotting for in the matter. And so this just actually was launched not too long ago. But again, you think of massive discovery teams, the way that this is enabling them to be more productive, be more efficient, be able to work more quickly. I've got a couple more to show you. This, I think, is absolutely fascinating. Like Lex Machina, this is a tool that really looks at outcomes, prediction of cases. And here, you can see all of the various data points that the technology is looking at to actually develop, or they claim, 86.7% accuracy on the likelihood that the judge will decide on your particular motion. That completely changes, the time that you would have spent looking at that research, understanding. I mean, you still have to do that. I mean, I'm sure that lawyers still are looking at that at legal, but the idea is that you're starting with that data first before you kind of expand and start to go elsewhere. I talked a little bit about earlier the impact on diversity, on wellness. This particular software, Legal Metrics, is actually looking at data of law firms such as diversity and inclusion, NPS. You can see the various 10 metric types so that companies can make informed decisions as to whether they want to hire those law firms based on these metrics. And so, in a time now when, we think of this particular conference, diversity and inclusion, women being able to be, in roles as partners in law firms, and having this type of data, really thinking about, is this a company I want to partner with, is important data to use. So I'm going to turn a little bit to my company and a couple things that we've done. Our focus really is how do we transform the way that lawyers think about the way that they are working in their workflow throughout the day. And so I've talked about all the technologies, the types of things they have to do. But one of those is how do we make it so that when they're working, you're actually capturing time without even knowing that you're doing it. And so this is one of our innovations, which is we launched automatic timekeeping. Someone is in a Microsoft application, it's actually capturing time in the background so that they know as they're working what they're doing for their clients. This is actually one area of the law where, when lawyers are billing their time, it can be very tedious for them. And so, our goal has been, how do we make it easier? This is actually one of the quotes from one of our customers. It said that having this type of technology improved their own productivity from 50 to 95%. Analytics, like being able to look at your financial analytics and being able to say, as a CFO, so this is a persona-based dashboard that looks at analytics for a law firm to say, how are we doing in terms of our growth? How are we doing in terms of our revenue? Who are the rainmakers at the firm that we should be focused on? Who should we help with coaching, perhaps because they're not meeting their metrics? Knowing where to expand into new areas. This is the kind of data that at your fingertips, for example, lets you know about how are you going to focus on growth for your own particular law firm. So, I know have been talking here a little bit about, legal tech, but when you think about how would you even apply this to other areas, there's a lot of different use cases. If you are building products or looking at technology where it's a service industry, reimagining how do you better deliver those services? How do you take a corpus of data and think of insights and analytics that make it easier to think about data-driven decisions? How do you create openness and transparency by virtue of the data so that maybe data that wasn't available before is now available for insight? How do you bill or improve the services that you do provide? But some of the things that I think about is, how do you use the data or how do you use technology to do good and to help those that are disadvantaged? Because when it comes to legal tech, when you think of the mission, what the law is about, it's I think for me very inspiring to see the aims and to see the technology that's emerging. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is sort of what are my predictions and vision for legal tech. I would love to see tech that empowers individuals, that lets them really, be able to take this data, that makes it available to them so that if you're ever confronted with a legal issue or you're maybe trying to research something on your own, that you have it available to you. I would love to see product-led growth models in legal tech where someone thinks about, how do we productize a practice area or think about, an area of law and make it available by delivering value. I would love to see more diversity, equity, inclusion in the development of legal tech and the availability of that data for everyone. And we're already seeing that, but the more that we can have that as a key KPI for revenue growth for any legal tech company and law firm or legal organization, I think we'll make strides. Data science and storytelling, we have distinguished guests in here who is at Columbia and Harvard, at Columbia and West Virginia, data science, but I think we are starting to see, this growth of this profession and people talking about data science and storytelling in legal tech. I'd love to see virtual law firms be the norm, not the exception. While we still are seeing, some strides being made, we work in a virtual world now. Technology enables that. So the more that we can, have law firms really come into that tech space, we will see, greater, I think, innovation. One thing that we are seeing is legal law firms and legal organizations developing their own product development teams, which is why we're seeing incubators, seeing more law firms developing their own tools, such as contract tools or other workflow types of tools. And lastly, the rise of new roles and professions, whether those are legal engineers, legal scientists. You are now starting to see these types of opportunities, which I think is amazing to see. But there is one thing that I would like to see most of, and it really is about being here. Earlier today, you heard some stats, both from Gretchen and in the session that we were in, about kind of the percentage of women in tech roles. Well, in legal tech, right now, only 13.8% of legal tech founders are women. And only 2% of women get VC funding. What would I love to see? I'd love to see women comprise 50% or more of legal tech founders. I'd love to see women get 50% or more or legal tech funding, because women belong in all places where decisions need to be made. And thank you. And when that happens is when innovation and change will truly happen. So thank you for being here. Thank you for taking some time to learn about legal tech. And I'm really honored to have had this opportunity at the EWiT Code. Thank you for being here. This is amazing to see all these extraordinary women in tech and our allies. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lydia. We do have time for a few questions. So I know we have several people in the room really interested in the topic. So what do you want to ask? This is your moment. Yes.
So I liked your slide that explained the different areas. I was wondering how much of an impact does security and compliance make in the legal tech
Oh gosh,
field?
It's huge. Yeah. So I'm on my side. I don't need that. I mean, security. I told I was telling my colleagues I was working this. They're like, Lydia, you only have half hours. I said, I know. We could do a whole class on this, frankly, because there's so much innovation happening. Security and compliance is a key, huge piece in that. When you think of, I'll give you an example. We were talking about people working remotely. So from a security standpoint or even compliance, think of an attorney who's doing a deposition in their dining room and their child during the pandemic might have been in the room next door. I mean, so first of all, you've got ethical, considerations, confidentiality, security, such as, is your computer secure, right? Law firms or legal organizations having to make sure of that. So there has been a tremendous rise, I would say, in, making sure that security is the priority. Because what you don't want is a hack, especially of confidential, privileged documents. So, we see that trend. Are there legal tech security companies? There's many consultants, I would say, and IT professionals, and every organization has a huge focus on the priority. I would say in terms of compliance, it would be the same. There's actually legal tech compliance tools out there that are looking at, what does, your system of records look like? How are you executing on different documents that the company may be issuing, and definitely, I would say, a resource. So it's another area that I would say is big. So, yeah.
Other questions? Here you go, Lloyd.
So I've been in internet engineering since 1979, and one of the pattern I've seen over and over again is bringing transparency to a essentially closed environment requires some very careful dancing.
Yes.
because those in power, those who are making the money from a occult environment, are not open to that kind of thing. And I'm very interested, and I've seen a lot of companies doing what I call bureaucracy as a service, and they've done some really nice work there. But I've been interested in your thinking and what you're seeing in terms of large law firms resisting the technology because it's going to reduce their billable hours, or they don't want people actually seeing. So the idea of a judge actually having a scorecard. I'm thinking of the federal judge in Florida who's making these incredibly weird decisions. How do you see that getting into the legal industry, since there's so much biased against it and people are making a lot of money based on not being transparent?
Well, I think there's two things, right? One is transparency of the law in terms of analytics that is available based on whether it's case law, whether, the data that is out there. So I showed you examples of a few systems. So, judges are looking, when a pleading is being drafted, the attorney or the legal professional is basically saying, here's what I see as the likelihood of success if I submit this. Judges and courts do look at legal data. I mean, there are opinions that have cited to analytics. So that I would say, there is that openness and transparency, and obviously you can go into legal research tools, whether it's Lexis or Westlaw, Bloomberg, others, to research that. I mean, it's publicly available. The question is that these legal information companies tag and code it and make it, so that you can search it faster, and it's enhanced, and there's annotations. Billing and rates of law firms, that is really negotiated with the law firm and the corporation. And typically, I would say that are rates public? Not, there are some firms that probably put some rate data out there. There are surveys that will show you the landscape of the different rates that are available. But I would say that kind of goes back to the attorney and the client, really thinking about, what are you going to charge us? Now, there's a big move towards alternative billing models right now, which is basically negotiating either a fixed rate for what you're going to charge. But I would say that is still between the client and the firm. But certainly that's not to say that corporations are not going to go shop around and say, well, hey, firm A is charging us this, and maybe we should go to this firm because I might get a better rate, and maybe the value of the services may be different. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Great question.